Thank you so much for attending my PowerPoint presentation on the creepiest things in WoW Explained. First up is the Karajan Crypts. Behind the Tower of Karajan in Deadwind Pass sits a sealed gate that has taunted players since World of Warcraft's launch in 2004. For over a decade, this crypt remained inaccessible through legitimate means, blocked off by Blizzard with what can only be described as the digital equivalent of crime scene tape. Players who were determined enough to bypass the gate through exploits and glitches discovered one of the most disturbing locations ever created in the game. What they found was a flooded chamber containing dozens of human corpses suspended underwater by chains, hanging upside down by their necks and feet in a grotesque display that earned the area its community given name, the Upside Down Sinners. The bodies themselves are remarkably detailed compared to other corpses scattered throughout Azeroth. These aren't your standard low polygon skeletons or hastily textured zombies. Somebody at Blizzard spent actual development time crafting bloated, waterlogged human remains with an uncomfortable level of precision. Players who managed to clip through the gate reported that the corpses appeared to have moving eyes, though this claim remains unverified and may simply be the product of people staring too long at drowned bodies in a video game. Either way, truly inspiring. Blizzard has never officially explained what the Karajan crypts were meant to be. Some speculate it was cut content deemed too disturbing for the game's teen ESRB rating. Others theorize it was part of a planned underground section of the Karajan raid that never materialized. The most popular theory suggests it was simply a test area for developers that accidentally shipped with the game, which Blizzard then decided to seal off rather than remove entirely, because apparently the solution to having a chamber of drowned corpses in your game is not to delete it, but to lock it behind a gate and hope nobody notices. Players spent years finding creative ways to break into the crypts using wall walking exploits, careful death positioning, and other methods that required significantly more effort than any reasonable person would expend to look at digital corpses. The crypt was finally made officially accessible in Legion's patch 7.3.0 after players solved an extremely difficult puzzle, though Blizzard still provided zero explanation for what any of it means. The mystery remains unsolved. The upside down sinners continue hanging in their flooded prison, and somewhere, a developer is laughing at all of us for caring this much about a sealed basement. Children of Goldshire. At precisely 7 a.m. server time, 6 human children spawn in the starting zone of Goldshire and proceed to walk around Elwyn Forest in perfect pentagram formation. Their names are Cameron, John, Jose, Lisa, Dana, and Aaron. Cameron always stands in the center, while the other 5 arrange themselves in a 5-pointed star pattern around him, maintaining this geometric configuration as they move through the zone like a satanic drill team. They eventually make their way to an empty house near the fishing trainer, climb the stairs, and stand motionless in the upstairs bedroom, forming their pentagram pattern while staring silently at nothing. They remain there until despawning at 8 p.m. server time, at which point random creepy sound files play. These include banshee screams, ghoul calls, and whispers from Sethun, the old god from the Temple of Ankiraj raid. If you're the kind of person who enjoys standing in circles of demon children, you'll be delighted to know that positioning yourself in the center of their formation places you exactly 666 yards from the Elwyn Forest and Stormwind City border. Yes, players actually measured this multiple times with different characters to confirm the number of the beast was intentionally programmed into the coordinates of 6 children arranged in occult geometry. Cameron occasionally breaks the silence to say, "Remember Sethun? Good old Sethun," which is either a reference to the aforementioned old god or proof that this child has seen things no mortal should witness. In the grass near their house, you can find 2 tiny skulls that players believe are children's skulls, though Blizzard has never confirmed whether these belong to previous members of the pentagram or are simply decorative infant remains. The locations the children visit while walking around the zone also form a pentagram pattern when marked on the map, because apparently one pentagram wasn't enough to get the point across. The community naturally assumed this was an intentional demonic Easter egg, possibly foreshadowing old god content or representing some dark ritual. Theories ranged from scourge infiltration to connections with the cult of the damned to proof that Goldshire itself was built on cursed ground. The actual explanation is significantly less interesting. According to John Stotts, the developer who document WoW's creation, the children are references to Blizzard's dungeon department employees named Aaron Keller, Dana John, John Stotts, Jose Ilo Jr., Cameron Lomprecht, and Lisa Schoner. They were added by the exterior level department as part of a friendly workplace rivalry. The geometric formation wasn't meant to be satanic at all. The children were simply centered on Cameron, which created a circle that players interpreted as a pentagram. The developers made Dana's NPC a girl specifically because because his first name sounded feminine and added the spooky sounds and evil references as a prank. So, congratulations to the WoW community for spending 2 decades analyzing the demonic implications of an office joke. Extraordinary, I know. Thaddeus's screams. In the construct quarter of Naxxramas, the floating necropolis of horrors that serves as Kel'Thuzad's fortress, players encounter Thaddeus, a massive abomination boss inspired by Frankenstein's monster. Thaddeus is built from the flesh of women and children who are slaughtered by the scourge, their bodies stitched together and their souls eternally fused within this grotesque prison of meat and lightning. Commander Eligor Dawnbringer explains this to players before they enter the raid with the kind of casual matter-of-factness usually reserved for discussing the weather. The souls are bound together forever, he notes, trapped in perpetual torment within Thaddeus's body. Cool boss mechanic Blizzard. While Thaddeus remains alive, sporadic screams echo throughout the entire raid instance. These aren't ambient background noise or subtle audio cues. They are distinct, desperate cries for help. Help me, a woman's voice pleads. Save me, another screams. Please, no! They beg, the terror in their voices suggesting they are fully aware of their situation and would very much like it to stop. If you listen carefully during the encounter itself, you can hear a woman's voice layered beneath Thaddeus's deep, monstrous growl, as if she's trying to speak through the creature's mouth. The screams continue at random intervals as raid groups clear other bosses, serving as a constant reminder that somewhere in this floating death fortress, tortured souls are crying out in anguish. The screams stop immediately when Thaddeus is defeated. The sudden silence is actually unsettling in its own way, like when a car alarm finally shuts off and you realize how much noise it was making. When Thaddeus dies, he says one final thing. Thank you. The implication is clear. Death is a mercy. The dozens of souls trapped in his body are finally released from their eternal suffering, and their last act is to express gratitude to the raiders who killed them. This is presented as a feel-good moment, which really says something about the standards we're working with here. Raiders, of course, largely ignored the existential horror of eternally damned souls screaming for salvation because they were too busy managing polarity mechanics. Thaddeus's encounter requires players to switch positions based on positive and negative charges, leading to raid leaders shouting callouts like left minus, right plus over voice chat, which thoroughly drowned out any cries for help from the women and children sewn into the boss. DPS players were significantly more concerned with maintaining their damage rotation and not standing in the wrong position than they were with the fact that they were fighting a screaming flesh amalgamation of innocents. Some players even complained that the screaming was less annoying than other boss mechanics in Naxxramas, which really puts into perspective what qualifies as a bad raid experience when constant wailing from tortured souls doesn't even crack the top 5. At least it wasn't Hygen the unclean safety dance, where you actually had to move. Yogg-Saron's whispers. Yogg-Saron, the old god, known by the title Hope's End, has been imprisoned beneath the Titan facility of Ulduar in Northrend for millennia. Despite this imprisonment, Yogg-Saron's influence seeps throughout the entire continent in the form of whispers that manifest in multiple locations, including Whisper Gulch, the Ahenkahet dungeon, and the Emirheim Saronite mines. These whispers are not subtle suggestions or vague murmurs. They are direct, paranoia-inducing statements designed to erode your sanity and make you question everyone around you. They are coming for you, a voice tells you while you're mining ore. Give in to your fear, it suggests helpfully. Kill them all before they kill you, it recommends, as if preemptive murder is simply good strategy. It was your fault, the voice assures you, confirming that thing you've been worried about. Tell yourself again that these are not truly your friends, it says, which is particularly effective when you're in a dungeon group with 4 strangers who keep standing in fire. Other whispers include gems like trust is your weakness, hope is an illusion, and you will be alone in the end, which are the kind of affirmations you'd expect from a therapy session conducted by an eldritch horror. The whispers appear in different zones because Yogg-Saron's black blood runs throughout Northrend in crystallized form called Saronite ore. Miners harvesting this ore are literally extracting the old god's blood from the ground, which predictably drives them insane. The Scourge used Saronite extensively to build Icecrown Citadel, proving that construction materials don't need to be OSHA approved when your workforce is already undead. Yogg-Saron was responsible for corrupting the Titan Keeper Loken and creating the Curse of Flesh, a malady that transformed immortal Titan-forged beings into mortal creatures of flesh and blood. This makes Yogg-Saron indirectly responsible for humans, dwarves, and gnomes existing in their current forms, which, depending on on your perspective, is either a tragic corruption of perfect beings or an explanation for why everyone keeps dying to mechanics. For players who wanted more whispers in their lives, Blizzard introduced the puzzle box of Yogg Saron through the archaeology profession in Cataclysm. This item, which players voluntarily assembled from fragments scattered across the world, produces additional disturbing whispers when used. The drowned god's heart is black ice, it informs you. The fish know all the secrets. They know the cold. They know the dark. It is standing right behind you. Do not move. Do not breathe. And the ever compelling open me, open me, open me, then only will you know peace. Players who engaged with archaeology reported hearing random whispers while collecting keystones, with many initially believing their game was glitched, or that their deadly boss mod's add-on had achieved sentience. One player reported they shat themselves when a dwarf keystone whispered that they would die, while others wondered if Emperor Palpatine was manifesting behind them. The fact that players voluntarily assembled this cursed artifact and then complained about being psychologically tormented by it really demonstrates the thought process of the average WoW player. You found fragments of an old god's puzzle box, pieced them together despite numerous warnings, and are now surprised that the box whispers madness at you. Congratulations on your archaeology achievements. Stalvan Mistmantle. Stalvan Mistmantle was a teacher and private tutor originally from Silverpine Forest, who eventually worked at the Moonbrook Schoolhouse and provided personal instruction to the Flintridge family. During his time as a tutor, Stalvan developed what the quest text delicately refers to as an indecent attraction to one of his students, a young woman named Tiloa. Her name is an anagram of Lolita, in case the reference to Vladimir Nabokov's novel about a middle-aged man's obsession with a 12-year-old girl wasn't immediately obvious to you. Blizzard was not subtle here. They might as well have named the quest The Legend of the Creepy Teacher Who Should Not Be Around Children. Tiloa gave Stalvan a begonia flower as a gift, which he interpreted as a romantic overture rather than what it actually was, a polite gesture from a student to her instructor. Her parents had already arranged her marriage to another man, and when Stalvan confronted Tiloa about their supposed future together, she made it clear that she saw him as an old uncle figure and nothing more. This rejection infuriated Stalvan and drove him to murder. He butchered Tiloa and her young groom-to-be with an axe, quite possibly massacring her entire family in the process. In his journal, Stalvan wrote that the blood he had spilled paled in comparison to the tears he had shed, which is the kind of self-pitying justification you'd expect from a man who just committed multiple homicides because a teenage girl wasn't interested in him romantically. After the murders, Stalvan retreated to his family home at Manor Mistmantle, northeast of Darkshire in Duskwood, where the darkness literally crept into him and consumed him until he became an undead revenant, through means that are never fully explained but can probably be attributed to sheer murderous obsession. Stalvan rose from death and remained in his manor, mad and hungry for revenge against anyone who dared approach. Madame Ava, a fortune teller in Darkshire, sensed through premonition that her granddaughter Alyssa was in danger from Stalvan and sent adventurers on an extensive investigation to track him down. The questline takes players across multiple zones, piecing together Stalvan's history through journals and documents scattered in Southshore, Moonbrook, Goldshire, and finally his manor in Duskwood. It's one of classic WoW's longest quest chains and also one of its darkest, presenting players with a genuinely disturbing tale of obsession, rejection, and mass murder that feels more appropriate for a horror game than a fantasy MMO. Most players probably didn't catch the Lolita reference because they were too busy wondering why they were tracking a serial killer for 3 silver and a pair of leather pants. In Cataclysm, the story continues when Stalvan's brother Tobias arrives in Darkshire seeking information about his sibling, only to discover that the townspeople are terrified to even speak about what happened. Tobias eventually pieces together the horrible truth through the shredded remains of Stalvan's journal, learning that his brother was not just dead, but was a murderous monster who had to be hunted down and killed. Family reunions in Duskwood are apparently not very pleasant. This is why we can't have nice tutors in Azeroth. Culling of Stratholme. Prince Arthas Menethil arrived at the city of Stratholme to discover that infected grain had already been distributed and consumed by the populace. The plague would transform every citizen into undead within hours, creating an army for the Dreadlord Mal'Ganis and the Scourge. Arthas, demonstrating the kind of decisive leadership that absolutely nobody asked for, decided the only solution was to purge the entire city. When he announced his intention to massacre every single person in Stratholme, his mentor Uther the Lightbringer responded with what can only be described as reasonable concern, asking how Arthas could even consider such an action. Arthas, already fully committed to his new career path as a war criminal, ordered Uther to comply. When Uther refused, Arthas disbanded the Knights of the Silver Hand on the spot and relieved Uther of command, which is technically within his authority as prince, but is also the kind of thing that looks really bad on a performance review. Jaina Proudmoore, Arthas's girlfriend and a powerful mage who could have been helpful in this situation, decided she couldn't watch him do this and abandoned him entirely. Arthas proceeded with the soldiers loyal to him, entering Stratholme and beginning a systematic slaughter of the entire population. Citizens were killed in their sleep, cut down while fleeing, and executed while begging for mercy. One particularly memorable exchange occurs when a citizen approaches Arthas saying, "Prince Arthas, may the light be praised. Many people in the town have begun to fall seriously ill. Can you help us?" To which Arthas responds, "I can only help you with a clean death." The citizen's response of, "What? This can't be," suggests they were not expecting their prince to immediately announce his intention to murder them, which is fair. The culling became a macabre race between Arthas and Mal'Ganis, with Arthas rushing to kill civilians before they could transform into zombies that Mal'Ganis would claim for the Scourge. Some citizens attempted to fight back, while others threw themselves into the flames, engulfing the city rather than face death at the hands of either side, which really says something about how badly this operation was going. The entire city population was massacred in what is described as one of the most significant events in Warcraft lore, marking the first major step in Arthas's descent from noble prince to death knight to eventually the Lich King himself. In Wrath of the Lich King, Blizzard made this playable content through the Caverns of Time dungeon, allowing players to travel back in time and assist Arthas with the Purge. You actively help him kill the citizens of Stratholme, earning achievements and loot for your participation in genocide. The heroic mode includes an achievement called the Culling of Time, which rewards players for completing the massacre efficiently within a 25-minute window. Speedrunning, a civilian purge for better loot drops, really captures the moral complexity Blizzard was going for here. The Warcraft community has spent over 20 years debating whether Arthas was technically correct in his decision, with forums full of people arguing that everyone was infected anyway, so really he was just preventing future casualties. The fact that this discussion is still ongoing demonstrates that nothing brings people together quite like arguing about whether a fictional prince was justified in murdering an entire city. The achievement for quickly finishing the dungeon even rewards you with a mount, because apparently the best way to commemorate participating in mass murder is with a limited edition Drake. Lord Aaron Throne Room. Above the Undercity, accessible through the ruins of Lordaeron's capital, sits the old throne room, where King Tyrannus Menethil II once ruled. The throne room appears mostly empty now, with debris scattered across the floor, and the general aesthetic of former seat of power that experienced a hostile takeover. On the floor, near where the throne once stood, there is a distinct bloodstain, marking the spot where King Tyrannus's crown hit the ground after Arthas murdered his father and claimed Lordaeron for the Scourge. Players walk over this bloodstain constantly while traveling between the Undercity and the surface, completely unaware they are stepping on the exact location where one of Warcraft's most significant assassinations occurred. If you turn up your ambiance volume, stand in the throne room, and wait patiently, you will hear ghostly whispers echoing through the chamber. These are not random spooky sounds added for atmosphere. They are Arthas's actual voice lines from Warcraft 3, taken directly from the cutscene where he killed his father. "This kingdom shall fall, and from the ashes shall arise a new order that will shake the very foundations of the world," Arthas's voice declares, repeating the words he spoke as he murdered King Tyrannus. The ghostly dialogue plays at random intervals, meaning you need to actually stand there and wait for it rather than rushing through like a normal person who has quests to complete and auction house transactions to conduct. Most players have no idea this exists. The throne room serves as a transitional space that Horde players run through constantly, particularly those who set their Hearthstone to the Undercity in Classic, or used it as a hub city in earlier expansions. Thousands of players have walked across this bloodstain without ever knowing what it represents, and even fewer have bothered to turn up their ambiance audio and stand around waiting for ghost dialogue to play. It is environmental storytelling at its finest, which is to say it is entirely missable if you have literally anything else to do. The blood trail itself is a small detail that shows someone at Blizzard cared enough to mark the moment King Tyrannus's crown fell from his head and rolled across the floor after Arthas struck him down. This is the beginning of the Scourge's conquest of Lordaeron, the fall of one of Azeroth's greatest human kingdoms, and the moment Arthas fully embraced his transformation into a servant of the Lich King. It is a pivotal moment in Warcraft lore, commemorated with a blood texture and some ambient voice lines that 99% of players will never experience because they can't hear patricide over Goldshire ERP spam in general chat. The throne room remains accessible in retail World of Warcraft, meaning this creepy detail has persisted through multiple expansions. Players still use the area as an RP space, which means there are people conducting elaborate role-playing scenarios while standing directly on top of a regicide crime scene. Some players who have been playing for years only discovered this Easter egg recently by turning up their ambiance volume for the first time since 2004 and finally hearing Arthas's voice echoing through the empty halls. Their typical response is neat Easter egg followed immediately by returning to the auction house, because ultimately nobody has time to contemplate the lingering trauma of a fallen kingdom when there are herbs to sell. Drustvar questline. Drustvar is a zone in Kultiras introduced during Battle for Azeroth that can best be described as what happens when Blizzard's developers receive the prompt witches and spooky and decide to commit fully to the horror genre. The entire zone is shrouded in darkness, filled with corrupted forests, witch hunts, body horror, and an atmosphere so oppressive that longtime players have described it as the creepiest content in World of Warcraft's history. One player who had been playing for 16 years across both Alliance and Horde stated that Drustvar contained the most disturbing quest they had ever encountered in the game, which is genuinely impressive considering this person had presumably already experienced the Karajan Crypts, the Children of Goldshear, and every other entry on this list. The zone centers around the Heartsbane Coven, a group of witches led by Gorak Tul, who practice Drust magic, worship death, and engage in human sacrifice with the enthusiasm of people who really believe in their work. The Drust are an ancient civilization that once ruled Kultiras before being driven out by human settlers, and they have returned through dark magic to reclaim the land by corrupting everything in sight. Animals throughout Drustvar are twisted into hostile abominations. The forests are dark and filled with creatures that absolutely should not exist. Bodies hang from trees. Ritual sites are scattered everywhere. The entire aesthetic is New England witch trials meets Lovecraftian horror, and Blizzard executed it with a level of commitment that makes you wonder if the development team was okay. Specific quest lines involve investigating houses, where you slowly discover disturbing details as you explore. Creepy children's items are scattered around. Unsettling notes describe rituals and sacrifices. Objects used in dark ceremonies are positioned in ways that make it clear something terrible happened here, and you are walking through the aftermath. The atmosphere builds gradually, layering detail upon detail until the reveals become genuinely frightening rather than simply creepy. One particular quest involves exploring a house that players have singled out as especially disturbing, with environmental storytelling that conveys horror through implication rather than explicit gore. You don't see the terrible things happen. You see the evidence that they did, which is significantly more effective at creating dread. The quest lines culminate in confronting the Heartsbane Coven and eventually entering Thros, the Blighted Lands, which is essentially a death realm where the Drust reside. This area takes the already dark tone of Drustvar and amplifies it, presenting players with a twisted mirror version of reality where everything is decayed, corrupted, and wrong. The commitment to the horror aesthetic throughout the entire zone is remarkable. Most WoW zones have some dark elements, but balance them with lighter content or typical fantasy adventure themes. Drustvar maintains its oppressive atmosphere from the moment you enter until you complete the storyline, never letting up on the witch cult body horror experience it has decided to provide. Players responded to Drustvar with reactions ranging from genuine appreciation for the horror storytelling to requests for therapy sessions after completing the zone. Comments include, "Thanks. I hate Kultiras now. I came here to farm Azerite, not develop PTSD," and observations that Drustvar is essentially Dark Souls, but as a World of Warcraft zone. Some players noted that at least the Horde zones would be lighter before remembering that Nazmir exists, which is the Horde equivalent of Drustvar, and features blood trolls, sacrificial rituals, and an equally oppressive swamp atmosphere. Multiple players reported that Drustvar was the zone that made them turn off war mode, not because of enemy faction players, but because they genuinely did not want to deal with PvP on top of the existing horror content. When your zone is so disturbing that players would rather disable a core gameplay feature than experience it while being attacked by other players, you have successfully created atmospheric horror. In conclusion, World of Warcraft zones are antagonistic, and you should absolutely play them. If you enjoyed this, check out World of Warcraft's most evil villains, Peace on Planet Earth.